Hello and a very, very good morning or good afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're checking in from. I hope you're all having a great day so far. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of today's ADSelfService Plus webinar. I am Sharda Murthy. I work with the marketing team of Manage Engine, and I am going to be your presenter for the day. Before I jump into today's session, I would like to do a very quick audio and video check. So if you can hear me loud and clear, and if you have no trouble viewing the screen, please drop in a yes message in the chat box. Waiting in for a couple of confirmations before I can proceed further with today's session. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Donna. If you can hear me loud and clear, and if you have no trouble viewing the screen, please drop in a yes message in the chat box. Thank you. All right. Perfect. So I believe that there's no issues with the audio and video currently. I just wanted to throw a very quick disclaimer. I'm working from home. I'm working remotely. I'm connected to a home network, and you know how it can be once in a while. So in case there are any technical glitches, in case there's any audio or video based discrepancies, please let me know by dropping a message in the chat box. I will quickly rectify my connection before proceeding further with the session. Zoom unfortunately does not have an audience view for the presenter, so I wouldn't know if the broadcast is seamless unless you notify me. So thank you so much in advance for that. That said, the next 35 to 40 minutes is going to be all about being able to identify weak Active Directory password users in the organization, and also ensure that no user has a weak predictable password by enforcing a custom granular password policy, not just for your native Active Directory, but across multiple on-premises and cloud applications as well. That said, this session is being recorded. So if you'd like to receive a personal copy of today's session, you can drop in a message to us in the chat box. We will make sure that the recording along with the slide deck reaches your inbox in the next couple of days. And I also want to let you know, if you have any questions for me, please drop them in the Q&A tab. I'd be more than happy to take time to answer your questions during the session itself, and also customize this session to answer your questions to meet your expectations. So all your questions are welcome. That said, let's start with a question that I get quite frequently when I speak about Active Directory, right? Which is, why are we still discussing an on-premises Active Directory in 2020? The ground reality is that 90% of organizations across the world still very heavily rely on the native Active Directory, more importantly, on a hybrid environment with Active Directory playing a major role. All right, but speaking about Active Directory, it is important to understand that the security posture of your on-premises AD setup is not great when it comes to passwords. It's not the best when it comes to user identity protection. And that is pretty evident from what you see on your screen, the numbers that you see on your screen, which clearly states that nearly 25% accounts can be easily compromised. And also nearly 95 million AD accounts are under the cyber radar, are under cybersecurity attack on an everyday basis. This is ground reality. And I like to say this jokingly when I speak about passwords, when I talk about protecting user identities, which is the fact that your account in mine could potentially be under a cybersecurity attack, as we have joined together here in this webinar to talk about the importance of password security, right? That's the situation that we have pushed to, and more so with the onset of COVID, with the onset of remote working, and also the fact that ransomware is now available as a service. The number of cybersecurity attacks have drastically increased in the last couple of months. It's pretty evident because you can hear the words cybersecurity buzzing day in and day out, especially if you work in an IT sector. You come across articles every single day speaking about why you need to protect your organization, how you can protect your organization, and different measures that you can take while working remotely to ensure that the security of your organization, of users' identities are not compromised. Today's agenda is to just add one aspect to protecting user identities, which is defending passwords in itself, the first primary layer of defense. All right. So my question to every single one of you is as simple as, is your organization secure? All right. And I'm going to try and add value to improving the quality of passwords users have in your organization as the primitive step, as the first step that we can do to ensure that user identities are protected and not easily susceptible to a compromise. All right. So the agenda is put forth in front of your screen. Let's talk about beefing up password security with a better password policy in place. This is a question that I have for you, a question out of curiosity. I'm sure you would have had experience of working with the native Active Directory password policy in particular. How old do you think the password policy is? How old do you think is the Active Directory, native Active Directory password policy? I'm going to look forward to your answers in the Q&A. I'm sorry, in the chat box. You can drop in your answers if you do know them. And I'm also going to reveal the answer in a bit. But before I do that, I like to look at it as a reality check. I like to look at this particular tool as a reality check, which is the Manage Engine Weak Password User Report free tool. What it basically does is it gives you an entire list of users in your organization who have a weak predictable password. I'm going to pass on the link for you in the chat box. All right. We have a couple of answers for the question that I posted. Thank you, Mark. Mark says 1999. John says 1982. All right. I'm going to wait if you want to drop in more answers. But clearly, the idea is pretty evident already, right? I've passed on the link to this weak password user report tool, which is step one. And I like to believe this is a reality check. All it does, all this tool does is give you a list of users in your organization who have a predictable weak password. And what happens in the back end is that this is a simple comparison between a huge, a simple comparison with a huge database of leaked passwords, predictable patterns, weak passwords, a huge list of such compromisable passwords. And this is a clear red flag. All right, if you have just a couple of users, let's say 3 or 4 users who have a weak password, it's a situation that you can tackle. You can notify them manually. You can let them know over a call, requesting them to step up their passwords, have better passwords in place. But imagine a situation where you have more than 10, even more than 100 users in your organization who have a weak predictable password. The ground reality is it's going to take a meager 2 or 3 hours or a couple of more hours to break into these user accounts and get access to your network, get access to critical business data. And this is exactly the kind of situation that we're trying to avoid. Because once again, I have been doing my groundwork. I have been reading a lot about the changes in user identity protection, user identity-based security after the onset of COVID. Because like I said, we're all working remotely. This is not a situation that we have tackled before. This is not a situation that we are used to. And in all honesty, it is a situation that scares me as a user belonging to an organization, because I do not know if I'm under a potential cybersecurity attack today as I sit here speaking about the importance of having better passwords in place. All right. So that said, the reason why I'm reiterating this time and again is because cybersecurity attacks have increased globally by 150% from just 2019 to 2020. All right. The number of cybersecurity attacks discovered in 2020 is more than half of 2020. I'm sorry, half of 2020 is more than all of 2019 put together. And it's a clear indicator that a lot more cybersecurity attacks are doing the rounds, a lot of phishing mails are doing the rounds, and it's easy to break into users' network now that they are susceptible to such emails, that they are susceptible to such, working from remote networks, working from not so secure networks, certain private or public networks as well. And it's not as good, or it's not as protected as your office network. Users are taking VPN connection to your organization's network from remote IP addresses as well. And this is definitely a concern. So once again, getting back to talking about the importance of keeping a check on passwords. This will definitely give you insights on what is happening real time in your end user's environment. And if you do have a number that is more than 10, I would definitely recommend, if you have users who have a weak password, more than 10 users who have a weak password, it's definitely time for you to step in and enforce a better password policy in place. All right, which is step 2, which is what I'm going to walk you through. So if you'd like to get a hands-on experience of this particular application, I'm passing the demo link in the chat box for you. You can log in to the administrative console. The demo is a live actionable demo, so you will be able to work along with me as I walk you through ADSelfService Plus. Please check your chat box for the demo link. And I have a question from Jose, and the question is, how does the password check happen? It's a simple check. It's a simple comparison between users' existing passwords compared with a huge database of weak, predictable, and leaked passwords. So since there is an existing list of weak, predictable passwords out there, it's a simple check against the existing list and then identifying users who actually have a weak, predictable password and listing them right here in this particular report. All right, so that said and done, let me log into ADSelfService Plus as an administrator. And I'm going to quickly jump to the configuration tab right here and move to password policy enforcer. But before I do that, I'm going to quickly drop in a poll for you. This poll will basically help me understand if a couple of you who've joined me today are an existing customer of ADSelfService Plus. Do you have a password policy in place? If you are an existing customer, then please let me know by dropping an answer in the poll. If you're currently evaluating the application, you can also let me know that by dropping your answers in the poll. But if it's neither, I would recommend you to simply skip the poll. This is just for me to try and understand how I can take this forward, depending on the number of customers who are with us or the number of evaluators who are with us. Surprisingly, right now it's a 50-50, so I'm going to leave it at that for a couple of more seconds. All right. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for answering the poll. I'm going to quickly end the poll at the moment. Perfect. So I do believe that nearly 30% of you have worked with ADSelfService Plus, and I believe that you have a custom granular password policy enforced, at least for the privileged accounts in your organization, at least for administrative accounts in your organization. What I've done here is I've sorted users into different user groups, trying to replicate a small organizational structure. This could be different based on the organization you're working with. This is completely customizable as well. This is simply segregation based on or building policies based on O user groups present in your Active Directory, which basically means that it could be done based on user roles, departments. It could be done based on offices, geographical locations. You can also filter it based on compliance mandates as well. Have specific password policies for different user groups, customize different complexity rules as well. As you can clearly see, I have one enabled for the administrative policy where I introduce characters. I make it mandatory to introduce characters right here. I also disallow characters from the username. I can choose to disallow a character consecutively. I can also choose to prevent users from setting characters from their old password or the old password in itself. But more importantly, the more critical points that we need to cover is having the facility to disallow dictionary words, having the facility to disallow predictable patterns like QWERTY, ASDF, the word password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, days of a week, months of a calendar, your organization name. You can also go about and import the entire week password list right here, making sure that there isn't a single person in your organization who has a weak predictable password, all right? And that should typically, or that should ideally be the situation today, simply because of the scare around us, simply because how easy it is to break into users' identities, the advancements in hacking technologies, and passwords, the native Active Directory passwords or the native Active Directory password policy not being enough. All right. Coming back to the question that I had asked all of you, our native Windows Active Directory password policy was coined somewhere around 1997, and it's nearly 2 decades old. But the ground reality is that we have not seen any drastic change. We have not seen any advancements in the native Windows Active Directory password policy. Yes, Microsoft did introduce GPOs. Microsoft did introduce a fine-grained password policy, but even today, users in your organization can still very well set test at 123, admin at 123, username, and many other predictable patterns as their password. In fact, in all honesty, I have for a very long time. I'm sure you have too. We're all guilty of setting weak password at some point of time. If not for our personal accounts, if not for our important business accounts, at least for test accounts, at least for shared accounts, and this situation needs to change. It's important to ensure that the first layer of defense, which is passwords in itself, is better. The password policy is better, and ensure that every single user can have a better password policy in place. You will be able to customize different complexity rules based on user groups. You can also choose to selectively enable password policy for user groups. But more importantly, highly, highly recommend you to have or revisit the password policy that you currently have, the native Active Directory password policy that you currently have, and step up and pick out better passwords. And before I walk you through the most probable password-based attacks that you can prevent with just a few complexities right here, there is a quick test that I'm going to run to give you a fair understanding of why we need to do this. All right. Yes, I do understand that password fatigue is a real story. I do understand that it's important for users to be able to remember passwords rather than generating a lot of helpless calls or having to reset passwords time and again. But let me tell you this. Test at 123, for instance, is a pretty weak predictable password that barely takes 3 hours to break into. If it's a brute force attack, just a couple of seconds. So would something like admin at 123. All right. Though it checks multiple boxes, you can choose to include casing, you can choose to include a special character, numeral as well, and yet it is a predictable bad password. But how about something like right? That's a clear passphrase that is easy for a user to remember. All right. That's definitely not my password if you were wondering, but that's a password that's definitely hack resistant, if not hack proof. It's definitely a password that is not available in databases and at the same time easy for an end user to remember. So if you'd not like to enable complexity, the least that you can do is allow users to set a password, a recommended password length of 15 and above with the passphrase tool to ensure that it's not easy to break into users' account. It's not easy to crack these passwords with currently available hacking techniques. That said, I am going to show you how this works in reality. So since I have a custom granular password policy enforced, it is automatically enforced across all my reset and change password pages. for my native Active Directory primarily. So when I try to enter my old password, key in my new password, reconfirm my new password, and manage to check almost all the complexity rules right here, it still considers the most important complexity rules, which is the dictionary word, the word password was used, and also the restricted pattern, which is the common word password. All right. And if you're wondering what I gave in, it's nothing but password at 123 with an uppercase of P. It does check almost all the complexity rules clearly. So time and again, it's not about bombarding users with a lot of complexity rules. It's not about bombarding users with passwords that need to check multiple boxes. The smart way to approach a password policy is to ensure that you have the right checkboxes in place. For instance, with a restricted pattern rule, disallowing dictionary passwords, disallowing password history, or disallowing characters from the username and from the old password, let me name or list the password-based attacks that you can prevent. I'm sure it's already crossed your mind. You can prevent dictionary-based password attacks, predictable pattern-based password attacks. You can prevent password history-based attacks, incremental password attacks. You can also prevent a huge chunk of brute force attack, because a lot of times it is hashes that do the job, hashes that is available for weak predictable passwords and patterns, weak predictable passwords or leaked password databases. And if the hash matches, it is a clear brute force attack. So a huge chunk of brute force attack as well, with just a couple of password policies listed right here. I have a question from Dan, which reads, will there be a way for me to view this video later if I'd like to share it with my staff? Yes, definitely. This webinar is being recorded live, and I will ensure that a copy reaches your inbox once we wrap up. Thank you. Thank you so much. Perfect. So coming back to talking about password policy, it's important to be able to have the right checkboxes, but also at the same time, not just work on extremely complex rules. It's also important to ensure that the right rules are enabled. All right. When I say the right rules are enabled, it could be based on compliance mandates. It could be based on regional requirements. If you work with languages other than English, it's also important to be able to disallow localized words, colloquial words, you know, all that and much more. So make use of a smart password policy, but more importantly, customize it for different user groups based on user privileges, based on compliance mandates, regional requirements, all that and much more. I'm sure you get the drill. And it's also important to educate users about the password complexity rule that you have enforced, which is not an option that's primitively available with your native Active Directory, right? Because I'm sure if you work closely with the help desk, there are a lot of instances where you would have come across cases where users call up the help desk requesting why a particular password is being rejected multiple times and that they have no clue. Because all Microsoft prompts when you try to enter a password that does not meet the complexity requirement is that the password cannot be accepted. So this can change. You can notify users about the complexity rules that they need to meet, and also have it displayed across different checkpoints. Customize the view, have it displayed across your web portal, your Gina CP screen, your mobile browser, as well as the ADSelfService Plus mobile app. And let's look at it from another perspective. Let's look at passwords from the end user console, right? So I did mention that you will be able to display this across all the reset password and change password pages, which is something that I have done. So now I'm going to log in as an end user. This portal can be customized, but since I'm working on the webinar, since I talk from an administrative perspective, I have the admin console enabled. When I log into ADSelfService Plus, as an end user, I can choose to enable a secondary factor of authentication, which is what I've done in this particular case. because two is always better than one. Two factors of authentication is always better than relying just on passwords. All right. This is important, especially when you want to pass on the torch of password self-service to end users in your organization. You want to allow them to have a single sign-on access to applications, allow them to sign up with different authenticators or even perform password resets and account unlocks. But coming to the important aspect that I wanted to talk about, the universal password policy. The reason why I said universal is because you have an option to enable this password policy for multiple on-premises and cloud-based applications. In this case, I have password synchronization enabled for my Office 365 account or the M365 with the latest Microsoft rollout. So when I try to change the password for this particular account, right here, once again, a clear red sign and a check only against the complexity rules I've met. I hit change password. Oops, there's a typo. I'm going to redo that again. All right. It's a yellow, but I still have not met all the complexity requirements and clearly still making use of the word password. All right, so this is what I mean. It's important to be able to display the complexity rules and let users know that they need to have a password that meets the complexity requirements. I do understand that it can be a little daunting when you see all these complexity rules listed on the screen, especially as an end user, but I already have my mind fixated on a password. All I try to do is add minor tweaks to, meet certain complexity rules. So I completely understand from an end user perspective as well, because I have been there a lot of times. But let me tell you this, it is more important to ensure that users' credentials are not easily compromised. The security of your organization, the users' identities are not easily compromised. And one of the simplest things that you can do, one of the easiest things that you can do is rework on your native Windows Active Directory password policy and also choose to apply them across multiple on-premises and cloud-based applications. So I'm going to quickly jump to the application tab right here to walk you through different applications for which you can not only allow users to reset passwords or change passwords, but also have the provision to enforce a custom granular password policy. So applications like G Suite, Salesforce, Zendesk, ServiceNow, and also on-prem applications like your ADLDS, Oracle database, your SQL, all that and much more. You can enable a password reset or a password self-service option along with enforcing a custom granular password policy. So it's completely up to users to work with a password policy, to choose to synchronize passwords between accounts, and also to set different passwords for different applications as well. That is also a provision that you can provide for users in your organization. So quickly jumping back to the agenda. All right. Yes, Donna, I will make sure a copy reaches your inbox. I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this name right. I'm really sorry if I'm doing it wrong, but I believe it's pronounced Duane. I'm sorry once again if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Duane, I'd also make sure that a copy reaches your inbox. Thank you so much. Yes, Curtis, I will make sure that a copy of this session reaches your inbox. Coming back to the agenda listed on your screen. Once again, once you have a reality check by running the weak password user report free tool, and once you are rest assured that you need a better password policy in place which restricts predictable patterns and dictionary words, I would highly recommend you to have the option to be able to enforce this custom granular password policy across multiple on-premises and cloud-based applications, but more importantly, enforce this across the important password changes and reset password pages as well, including your Control-Alt-Delete screen, including the logon screen as well as the ADUC console. I will walk you through how password policies are enforced in the ADUC console in just a couple of seconds. But what I would do typically is once I have a password policy in place, once I have enforced a custom granular password policy for multiple applications, I would also go back and run the weak password user report 3 tool to have a reality check once again to see if there are any pending user accounts, if there are any users who still have a weak predictable password, and then, get a reality check once again to make sure that there aren't any easily compromisable predictable passwords in your organization, password users in your organization. That said, jumping back to my setup right here, I am going to jump to the ADUC console. I want you to notice that I've logged in as an administrator, right? Which clearly means that I'm working on a server level. I have the utmost privileges, and let me try to set a weak password. A clear rejection, all right? A clear rejection simply because it does not meet the custom granular password policy that we have enforced, which is great because even when you do not want to hand over the torch of password self-service to users, even if you have a bunch of users who you would not like to give the provision of password self-service to, it could be temporary accounts, interns, it could be contract employees as well, where you do not want them to have the facility to self-service passwords. You as an administrator, while you need to step in to reset their password, you still have to ensure that the password is secure, the password is strong enough, and you do not even leave a small window where it can be susceptible to a cybersecurity attack. Because once again, reminding you of all the numbers, I love surveys, I love reading about reports and what the ground reality is when it comes to user identity compromise, simply because it's a subject that I really enjoy. And ground reality is Microsoft has let us know that nearly 95 million Active Directory accounts are under compromise every single day, are under the cybersecurity radar every single day. All right. And with the recent trends, with all the social engineering attacks doing the rounds, with all MNCs from Marriott Hotels, the San Francisco Airport, World Health Organization, IDC, the official health organization in the UK, and all the way to the Middle East, there are multiple organizations that have faced social engineering attacks in the last couple of months, just in the last 6 to 7 months, with the onset of COVID, with the onset of a mass remote working environment, with ransomware available as a service right now. So it's highly important to defend the first level of protection, in most cases the only layer of protection, which is passwords in itself. And let me reassure this, the problem is not with passwords. The problem is only with a weak password policy, and that is something that you can definitely change. You can step up and have a better password policy in place across your on-premises and cloud applications as well. I would highly recommend it for pretty much all user groups in your organization. And before I wrap up today's session, I'm going to quickly walk you through the reports tab. You can keep a tab on all end user based audits, password changes, self-update of personal information, all that and much more right here. So I do have a couple of them. Let me quickly click on more to show you that that's a successful password reset. I will be able to notice change password operations as well. Keep a tab on identity verification failures. This is a clear red flag if you have multiple identity verification failures for a group of user accounts within a short period of time. And also the user attempt audit report, which gives you insights on every single logon detail, attempted when, from where. I'm checking in from India. It's pretty early in the morning, so this is the Indian timestamp. But yes, these are some things that we did earlier today, right? So a complete insight into what's happening in your end user's environment can be audited, can be reported right here under the reports tab if you make use of ADSelfService Plus. That said, another red flag could potentially be the password expired users report. So when I filter this, I don't need to filter this. I have a clear example right here. There might be cases in your organization where user accounts are stale. There are idle user accounts, password expired in over 2 or 3 years. These could be temporary accounts, test accounts created for testing. It could be users who are no longer part of the organization. It's highly important to identify these stale accounts, quarantine these accounts, revoke permissions within AD, disable them, and eventually delete them. Perform an Active Directory cleanup well within 30 to 45 days. 45 days would be an ideal time to perform an Active Directory cleanup. Make sure you do not leave any security loopholes in your organization when it comes to user identity-based compromise, because let me tell you why. Password expired user report might not seem like a big deal unless there is sudden access to this particular user account. The password has been reset. The user has access within your organization, but you will not be able to identify if a real user has access or if it's an insider threat or an external threat, right? So if you do have stale accounts, if you do have idle accounts, I would highly recommend you to revoke permissions primarily and then eventually perform an Active Directory cleanup. All right, so that is something that I wanted to touch upon before I wrap up the session for the day. If you have any questions, please keep them coming by dropping your message in the questions tab. I'm going to take time to answer your questions offline. Once again, this is just a very small module of what you can do to improve the security posture of your organization. Cybersecurity is huge. And when we speak about user identity compromise, there are multiple things that you can do to be in your A game, all right? But primitively, the best thing that you can do, or the best place to start at, is to improve the first and only layer of defense in most cases, which is password itself. And I really hope that this session was informative. I really hope that you will be able to customize a granular password policy for users in your organization and improve the security posture in your organization. That said, I'm going to take time to answer your questions offline. If you'd like to reach out to me in the near future, you sure can. My email address is on your screen. I'm available at shard@manageengine.com. I work with the marketing team of ManageEngine, and a big part of what I do is talk about the importance of having an efficient hybrid identity management in place, but more importantly, talking about password security and better password management. So if you have any questions in any of these domains, or if you'd like to connect for a quick discussion, please feel free to drop in your messages. I'd be more than happy to be in touch.